Welcome, friends, and thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning or afternoon, wherever it is in your part of the world. I'm joining you from my living room here in San Francisco, California, and I'm joined by my amazing board colleague and co-presenter, Deborah Bennett, who's joining us from Akron. We're really happy to have you here this morning to talk about how we make compelling materials for our case, and to do a little bit of learning and teaching about why we even need to spend the time making a case for support for our stewardship. It seems like it would be obvious to us why we need to raise money for our congregations, but it's not obvious to everyone. And so we want to make sure that we give you some tools that help you tie your mission and your ministry to the dollars raised and be able to talk about what you do for your inner community and your out-focused community and how you do that work and why stewardship is a part of that. So we're really excited to present this and hope that you have lots of great ideas and questions. My name is Davey Gerhard. I'm the executive director of TENS, and I came on to the organization just before the pandemic. It's been an amazing learning curve as we've transitioned into virtual learning, and these webinars that you are participating in have been a really great part of our ability to connect with people from all over the country, all over North America, and engage in this learning. So thank you again for being here. I want to introduce my friend, the Reverend Deborah Bennett, who's rector of Church of the Savior in Akron, Ohio, to tell you a little bit about why she's here and things that are interesting to her about this project.
So I'm going to say thank you, Davey. Good day, because that kind of covers wherever we are in whichever time zone in the country. And I am delighted to be with all of you today. I always think of stewardship as something that we live into all year round. And it is a part of being that co-creator, co-worker, co-laborer, colleague in and with God and God's mission. And so I've been a member of the Board of TENS, I think January of 2021, I think that's when it was. As you can see, I don't remember because we have such a wonderful time engaging in this ministry. And I believe that stewardship is a ministry. So I use that language a lot. And so being in a position to talk about that and to learn, not just to share what we know, but to hear and to learn from everyone we are engaged with. And that's including you all who are on this webinar with us today. And so being able to share some of the things that I have learned about this ministry of stewardship is exciting for me, and just to share with you some of the things that we have learned through the years. So that's why I am here in my kitchen, one of my favorite rooms in the house, because as we know, the kitchen is the heart of the house where good things come from. So
excellent. Well, thank you, Deborah. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being in your kitchen. One of these days, I hope to sample your much touted baking prowess. So one of these days, it'll happen.
It will happen.
I noticed that we also have our fantastic and fabulous board member, past president, Mary McGregor, on today's call. Mary has helped congregations all over Texas and all over the country think about how they communicate their great message. And so, Mary, we welcome you today, and we look forward to what you might have to contribute to our conversation, as you always have great things to say. Welcome. I'm going to share a couple of our learning objectives for our time together today. The first is, what is a case for support and why do we even need one? One of the things that we hope to do today is to teach everyone why in church we need to sometimes think like Madison Avenue, think like marketers, learn how we have something that the world needs and we need to tell people about it. That's our members, that's our community, that's the people we serve and the people we seek to serve. So let's talk a little bit about what a case for support does and why we need one. And we're going to talk a lot about what elements should go into a case for support, how you do storytelling and how you talk about your different membership members and what should go into that. And then we're going to talk about how to put it together. It's one thing to collect all the information. It's another to put it into a digestible format so that people can understand it and get it. So we'll talk a little bit about what you do once you've gathered all that great material and how you put it into a format that can be shared easily. Deborah's going to start us off with a few slides on why have a case for support and what one is.
Thank you, Davey. And so Davey mentioned thinking like marketers, like Madison Avenue. When we are looking at our ministry and what it is that we do, how we are together, how we interact with our community and all of that. And sometimes we take for granted that everybody knows, even the people we worship with on Sundays, that everybody knows the story. But there are aspects, just like when you're in a family or, if you're trying to sell a product and you're thinking about, oh, that York peppermint patty, it has that silver wrapping and it has that chocolate and it has that cool mint on the inside. And when we talk about who we are, it generates excitement. When we remind people about how we are connected to this story, it generates excitement. What it is that brings us together? What is that? What's that hub? What are we moving toward? And so all of that generates excitement and people want to be a part of that, right? And so when we are looking at what's our ministry, where does stewardship fit into all of that? Telling our story helps us all to envision the future and how we're going to get there. What are the things that we need to get there? And so looking at what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to do? How do we get there? Those are all reasons why we want to build this case for support, where we want to envision and draw people in and, and start to create a picture of what we envision. And so sometimes the strategic plan, if we have a strategic plan, sometimes that's the thing that is the springboard that helps us to begin to put some flesh on the skeleton, as it were. And it helps us to think about what are our goals? What are those things that we think God is calling us to be and to do? And so that plan helps us to focus a little bit more. And if we don't have a strategic plan, just to begin to talk about, wow, if we could, how would you fill in the blanks? If we could do this, how would you fill in the blanks? And then what do we use to help us to know where we are? So we start to put things down. We might, kind of like throwing spaghetti on the wall and looking at those ideas and then testing them out, talking with someone, just like, when you are at work or you're at school or you're hanging out with some friends and you have this idea and you say, I want to run this past you. What do you think? What do you think? How do you think this, who do you think this audience is? What do you think people would say about that? And so it helps us to know whether, oh, wow, that was really exciting, or back to the drawing board. And so that's how we begin this process of creating support for the mission and the vision and the ministry that our stewardship supports. Oh, thank you, Davey. And what's important, every person has something to contribute, right? Every person is uniquely gifted in a particular way. And so to honor those gifts, to bring those gifts to the forefront, to let everyone know that you are needed because you have this really special gift of welcoming people in, or you have this really special gift of talking to the people in the community, or you have this amazing voice, or, whatever that gift happens to be. And when we talk about those unique things that each one of us brings to this beautiful mosaic of who we are in our faith community, who we are in our congregation, that also generates energy and excitement. And that it reminds all of us that without some of us, we aren't fully who we are, because there's a piece that is missing. And so all of that helps as we're putting together our case. It helps people to begin to think and to say, what can I do? How can I help this vision to come about? How can I think outside of the box, or get rid of the box altogether and imagine what could be? How much can I contribute? And not just monetarily, that's a part too, but how much can I contribute of myself? How much of this gift can I share that will help to enrich and impact the ministry that we're engaged in? And so with our case, it helps us to pull out talking points that are part of our campaign. And then we start talking about that, and everybody is talking about that. It could be abundant blessings. We share abundantly in every good work. Maybe that was one of our talking points. And so everybody's talking about blessings, abundant blessings. What are the blessings in my life? And so they become a part of our template for our pledge campaign. And also we see it on our website, or whatever the vehicle is that we use for our communicating within our internal congregation and our external congregation, because our communities are our external congregations. They're integral parts of who we are. So there's the internal congregation and our external congregation. So whatever the vehicles are that we use, maybe we have a sign outside of the church, and maybe we're going to put on there, because that's one of our talking points, abundant blessings. So creating a draft is always important. It helps us to see where we are and collect what ideas we have collected. And then we can test it out, just like, a focus group, again, like Madison Avenue, let's pull together a few people and let's try this out. And make sure it's a mixed group. Our young people, our older people, our middlers, are people who maybe we have some people of different cultural backgrounds. We pull them in, and we just try to get a good cross section, not a lot of people, but a cross section that represents who we are. And let's run that through and see, what do we hear? What are people saying? What are they excited about? What are they not excited about? What can be expanded? What should we leave on the drawing board? And then we try it again, test it out again, see what happens the next time until we get to where we think we want to be. So when we're looking at tweaking our cases to fit different contexts within our congregations, we need to listen to those voices, right? We have some new people who may have come in and, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What might be helpful as we continue to have new people join us, whether it's in the building with us or on Zoom or YouTube, or however we're transmitting our worship experience. What are they telling us? What are the different generations telling us? And so perhaps we don't have a static campaign, but we have one that speaks to each of the contexts that are represented within our faith community, but still having the same vision and the same mission and the same goal. Just it's being transmitted a little bit differently in ways that are relevant to our different contexts. And when we do that, it also reinforces the importance and the value and the gift of each of our members and the contributions that they make. And it lends itself to and the encouragement of commitment and the willingness for people to join in, because we're seeing reflected back to us who we are and how we understand ourselves and our place within our congregation.
I wanted to bring us back in before we move on to talking about generational differences in our congregation, and see if anyone had anything to say about what Deborah's presented so far, why we even have a case for support. And this comes up because in my own congregation, I know sometimes, we don't have maybe the bandwidth to redesign our stewardship materials from scratch every year. So maybe we use last year's, or we tweak it a little bit. And every once in a while, I'll go somewhere and I'll look at their stewardship materials and be like, these kids that you have, they've gone to college now. Like, you're still using this picture from your children's program, but they've gone on. So maybe it's, I wonder what your experiences are with this. And I see that Camille, come off mute and share your question or your idea with us.
Okay, actually, it's a question. I wonder if you could make a distinction between a church's mission statement, which may last, for several years, and a case statement.
Yeah, great. I love that. So your case statement, I think, takes that mission, which is your overall, like, what are we trying to do for the community? What are we hoping to do for ourselves? Your case statement relates our stewardship, our gift giving of time, talent, treasures. It relates it to the mission. So how can you contribute? And what's the impact of your contribution? And that second part, we're pretty good in the Episcopal Church of saying, how can you contribute? Pretty good. But what we're really not, what we really need a lot more experience in, I think, in the Episcopal Church is saying what the impact of your gifts in the community are. I love that we sometimes say, your gifts support a food program, but we forget to say how many people a year that food program serves. Or, you know, it's great that we have a pastoral care team. Well, how many hospital visits do we do? Or, you know, how often are we picking up the phone and reaching everyone on the list? Those sorts of metrics are also really important. So a case for support talks about how we tie our gifts to the mission, and then also how we impact the community. Great question, Camille. Thank you. Christopher, you've got a question or a comment.
Hi, thank you so much. Chris Davidson at St. Margaret's in Palm Desert. Deborah, thank you. I so appreciate the conversation, the presentation. And I just wanted to offer something just from my perspective. One of the things that was interesting as we were putting stewardship material together is people come up and say, oh, hey, I've got a whole file of stuff from a few years ago when we did stewardship and we worked so hard on this, and take a look at it. So I had a wonderful opportunity to look through some stuff from a few years ago. And the reason I bring it up is it's about the use of the word case, because what happened with that particular campaign, which was a lot of wonderful work, but it was a kind of over-intellectualized kind of, these are literally the sort of 99 reasons why you should give to the church. And that's a lot of good work, and it reflects a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of mission and messaging and all that kind of thing. But my point is to remember the emotional aspect of this and connecting with how people feel about the parish, and making that clear linkage between the outcomes and the work and the mission and where they are in their lives, and that sense of belonging to something that's very important. My thinking about this is very influenced by Nouwen's book on stewardship, that feeling that you are part of a plan and that you feel good about it, so that there's joy connected to it. So there are two things. It's, yes, you have to be very thoughtful about all of these things as you outline, but in the end, at the end of the day, it's the emotional response that people have that it really kind of triggers what their action is going to be in terms of stewardship.
Christopher, thank you for that. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the ways we are able to capture that too is being creative. You know, creativity is, you know, we don't, even if we have limited funding, everything doesn't have to be like black and white. When we capture, oh, there was a group out at some place doing something, but how can we be really creative? Because when we are creative, we really do capture that emotional piece, because we see people being together, you know, and I think that when we include that in our stewardship, of proclaiming the good news, right, in word and deed, it just creates that joy that you were speaking of, and that excitement and that happiness, and you know, because it brings us back to a space of, oh my gosh, remember when blah 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 blah, and there's always laughter after the remember when piece. And so I would say, don't be afraid to be creative. Like, push the envelope on that creativity.
Thanks, Chris, for your question. We had a question from Grace about samples of case statements that we can look at as examples. We'll pull some together. I have a few. I know Deborah has some. I don't know if they're in digital format. So we'll make sure that we get some and we post them and send you all a link so that you can see. I've seen some great ones. I've seen some clunkers. I'm sure we all have. So Grace will get you a couple of examples of ones that go well and ones that don't go so well, so you know what not to do. I think both are really useful. Thanks for your question.
Davey,
Yeah.
can I make it?
Mary?
Can I give an example? Just take a moment. I worked with a church that was at a place, it was a fairly new church. It was about 10 years old. And their annual budget just simply wasn't enough for their continued growth and development. And I love what Christopher had to say about connecting with the emotional and the relational, and what Deborah said about creativity. And the year they specifically had me come in to work on their annual campaign, what they could do. And they had an aha moment and a great deal of brainstorming about how they could be creative, how they could connect with their people in a more engaging way. And I just want to tell you a little piece of what they did as a demonstration. They put out a wonderful case statement about their need, their involvement, what the church was doing, but the campaign itself, in an effort to get everyone involved, had every single person in the church who arrived at a worship service put their hands on a big board in finger paint. And they took these images that were handprints of children, old adults, everyone, and they used it as an altar frontal for the course of their campaign to talk about people's individual engagement in their campaign. It was so creative. They had handprints hanging from the ceiling made out of construction paper. I mean, they took the theme and ran with it. They had an immensely successful campaign, much more than they usually did. So this is just an example of how to take a need that you can articulate in a case statement, but make it extremely personable and engaging and get people involved.
Mary, thank you. That is a great, so again, case statements need to impact everyone and individuals at the same time, right? Because that's what we need them to be broad enough that they get an audience, but personal enough that I feel motivated by that statement to want to make my contributions. Great point. Elizabeth, I see you've got your hand up.
I'm actually in Cambridge, Massachusetts this year, and that probably affects my perceptions of stewardship messages, so I'll just note that. I would just remind folks that in my experience, especially recently, you have to start first with why church matters and why Christ matters. Because there are plenty of people who do not know it, including a fair number who walk in the doors of churches. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go back, you don't have to make the case for God. And I mean, it doesn't have to be 2 months of preparatory sermons, but you should be able to take your case statement and be able to read it and understand that it's coming from a church.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for reminding us of that. Yeah, we want to be slick and we want to be marketers, but we're also Christians. And the mission is about the work we do in the community, and it's about the mission, like the Great Commission that Jesus gave us. So let's remember that and always tie back to it. You know, I see a lot of stewardship materials, and the ones that forget to talk about Jesus or God and just talk about church, I'm like, you're missing something there. We are motivated by something deeper. And it gets lost sometimes, not because these people, we forget that we're Christians, but sometimes we forget that other people need to know it. That's a little teaser for tomorrow's gospel. They will know we are disciples by our love. So remind everyone why you're doing this work. Thank you. I love that point, Elizabeth. Good one. All right, I'm going to move us back into our presentation, and we'll come back in here. So if you've got more questions, I see some people are typing them in. I love that too. So keep your questions coming, and we'll have more chances to ask them. I want to talk a little bit now about some generational differences in our communities. Last month, we did an entire webinar on intergenerational motivations for giving, and I was joined by our board president, Dina Van Claveren, on that. It's posted to our website. You can find it in our webinar section. So we went into great detail, but I want to bring it into this conversation as well, because the first is some good news. Due to the miracles of modern medicine and longevity and the way we are building communities these days, we have 5 generations alive and active and giving in church at the same time. That's spanning an enormous amount of chronological time and 5 distinct generations, from those of us who were born into and remember war, and those of us well, Americans are born into and know war at every generation, it seems, but to our Gen Z folks who are making their first gifts and beginning establishing giving traditions with nonprofits and church. So I want us to know that we need to appeal to all of those generations, and they are motivated by slightly different ways. Again, I plug our previous webinar where you can go into great detail about each generation. But in general, you know, the older our congregation members are, the more they are motivated to give by protection of the institution, giving because they want church to be there because it's been there for them. The institution, there's greater institutional trust. And so sometimes with our older generations, our late Gen X, our baby boomers, our matures, just saying the church needs your gift is the beginning of the conversation and can help. But with our millennial and our Gen Z donors who are beginning to make gifts into our church, they want to see impact. They want to see, well, what are you doing with my money? And that's beyond funding the utilities and the salaries, but they really want to see, what are you doing to forward the mission of the church? Are you seeking and serving? Are you healing and feeding? Are you really doing the work that you say you're doing? And they're holding our feet to the fire in a great way of making certain before they commit to giving money of how they're doing it. So being aware that different generations react differently to the motive to give is really important. Because again, as you create that case for support, you want it to appeal to the broadest audience and also to the specific individual. This also ties in, later we're going to have a slide on making sure you tell people how they can give. But this is a plug to remind us all that your Gen Z and your millennial donors may never be interested in your pledge form paperwork, that they might decide to give online, to give through recurring gifts, and they may never fill out any paperwork. That just might not be the way they create relationship with institution. And churches are going to have to figure that one out. We're going to have to figure out how we create and maintain our budgets when some other generations may not be interested in the tried and true pledge form that we are, that is so natural to us in so many other ways. This is a good reminder that that different generations react differently. Again, please check out our webinar where we go into 90 minutes of detail on how each generation impacts this. But I do want to leave you with a couple of great points on how you can make certain that your materials are connecting with younger donors. We talked about the first one, which is showing results. So our Gen Xers, our millennials, our Gen Z, they don't just want to make gifts because of the status quo. They don't want to maintain your institution because it's important to the community. They want to know what you're doing. They want to see the results. So that part of the case statement that's about impact and mission is really important. How many people are you feeding? Where are you doing your tutoring? How many socks did you collect and distribute? You know, whatever it is that you're doing in the community, tell them about it. And for those congregations that say, we don't have a big marquee social program that you know makes headlines and involves dozens of volunteers. Well, what are you doing for your own members that make them connect with the mission? So we forget sometimes that in-reach is as important as outreach. And so our people are coming to us for healing, for the moments in their lives. And then sometimes that's the case we need to make. We need to talk about what we're doing for each other, how we're helping each other. When it comes to our younger members and donors, we want to focus on retention or that recurring gift. So they may not, as I said, fill out pledge paperwork. They might fill out an electronic form where they slide the switch over that says, make this a monthly donation, and feel like they're committed now to this organization. It's a whole different mentality than the one that we might have grown up with and might have thought about. We need to do the backfill as people in church to remind them that generosity is a discipline, that stewardship is an ongoing gift, that it's relational, that it changes as our capacity and our ability to engage changes. If we're making the same gift today that we made 20 years ago, but our life has changed, our job has changed, it might be time to reevaluate our giving. So incurring that that habit of generosity at a young age, instilling it through messaging, through opportunity to give, through real connection, is really important. We need our younger donors to understand that they're beginning a relationship that's going to walk with them and change with them as their days and lives change. Volunteerism is really important with our younger donors as well, because they see it as a gateway to membership. Sometimes they will come along with friends to a feeding program, to a tutoring program, to a cleanup day, to something that you're doing in the community as volunteers to test out your message. Are you really doing the work? Are they interested in the work you're doing? Are you giving them opportunities to connect with their rolling up their sleeves and by generating their ideas? Or do you just want their money? And they're really clear about this. They would like to give all of the things that they can give. So make certain you have volunteer opportunities. Make certain that it's not just the same 12 people that will show up on a Saturday to do your thing that you're inviting, but that you're casting a broader net, that you're going out into the community, talking about ways that people can get connected, because they will become visitors first through volunteerism and then later maybe come into the church to see what's going on, and then later maybe begin putting something in the plate or begin connecting with your donations. That's a different trajectory than the standard. They show up on a Sunday because they are hungry and you give them a great community and then ask them to participate. So we need to think a little bit about our intake process when it comes to our younger members. They may start off by investigating around the fringes before they even come to a service. Finally, akin to encouraging generosity as a discipline, we need to think about discipleship. We need to think that our younger donors want community. They want to understand how their actions are a part of something bigger and broader and more important than themselves. And discipleship, that relationship with the big mission, is really important. We tend to think that our Gen Z and our millennials are just, behind their headphones and not paying attention to the big message, but they're thinking really deep thoughts, and they're hungry to connect to something bigger. So much of their worlds are very small. So we need to help them be broader and give them opportunities for real connection and meaning within the community. They're following and they're leading. Discipleship means both things, not just following, but also being able to lead and invite others in. So if we give them those opportunities and really bring them along with that, we can increase our commitment to our younger donors. Again, we have a great webinar on this. Go watch it, download the slides, and we'll run this one again because it was a really good one. It was well attended and people had a lot of questions. So we want to make sure that we talk about this a lot. It's the future of the church, for sure. Now, I'd like us to shift focus again and talk really about the elements that go into your case for support. We're going to have a few slides about that, and then I'm going to pull us back in to a broader conversation. And Deborah's going to do some storytelling with us and help us figure this out.
Thank you, Davey. So the story of our case is really the story of us. What is our history? What's the history of the church in which you are a member? Sometimes knowing our history and knowing who we are now helps to build out the picture. So I had the privilege of belonging to a congregation. My home congregation in the Diocese of Long Island was incorporated in 1702 with a cemetery that we passed through every Sunday to go into the building for worship. And so part of that history was always with us. But as through the years, talking about that history, but also the present history. Who are we now? Who were the people who laid the foundation, and what was their vision, and what was their hope, and what was their mission? And how has that changed through the years to the present time? Helps to build that picture of who we are and why we are looking toward a particular vision or what our mission is. And so the church where I am now was started by a number of women who wanted to worship in their neighborhood. And they petitioned the diocese to have a space in the neighborhood. And their hope was to be a beacon within the neighborhood. As the years went forward, the community changed and a number of the faith communities moved so they were more visible. but the folks at Church of Our Savior decided they wanted to stay in that neighborhood to serve the people in the neighborhood. And so that has been the focus. So our story helps us to know where we were, who we were, and where we are going, and who we are now, and how that honors the shoulders upon which we stand, and it gives us a place to move in the future. And so it helps us to be forward-looking versus just staying in that space of, well, we wanted to stay in the community. Well, what are we doing in the community? Why are we still here? How are we continuing to be relevant and to live that mission and ministry that is ever before us? And so knowing, putting that part as a part of our story and recognizing, wow, look at what happened. Look at how many people started. Maybe there were 5 people who went and petitioned. Maybe the church was a smaller mission, and now it is a program-sized parish. Or maybe it started with 5 people and it's a family-sized parish, but much could be accomplished. And so knowing our story helps to continue to put that flesh on that skeleton as we are planning our mission and our ministry as we're going forward. And it also helps us to know our place in the community. And who is in our congregation who perhaps was, maybe they were a child there. What do they know? What do they bring into the story as they grew up? Maybe there is someone who can remember the first members. Maybe the congregation isn't that old and people can remember those days. So that's something that can be shared. Like the shoulders that we stand on aren't necessarily buried. Some are still with us. And so having that piece as a part of our story is important. And who's in our congregation, right? Who are our people who are in other organizations that we have a relationship with? Who are the people who, what do they do? Maybe they're doctors, maybe they're teachers, maybe they're secretaries, maybe they're custodians, maybe they're carpenters, maybe they are, they have their own business. So where do people live is also a part of our story. It also tells us what our resources are, right? And so all of that is a part of our story. And it also reminds us of our interconnectedness and our relationships, and that we go beyond those times when we are together on a Sunday, but we carry our congregations with us into our workplaces and into those spaces where we live, where things may be happening, and perhaps that perspective has informed how we do our mission and ministry. And so all of that is a part of our story. So it's helpful when we know who do we sit next to on a Sunday?
Yeah. I love this topic, Deborah. And, you know, it reminds me of a story. A few years ago, I was visiting a congregation and I got there a little early. And so I was looking at their stained glass windows, as I like to do. I noticed, because I just tried to find this church. And so I'd been looking at a map and I'd found Google Maps had told me how to get there. And I noticed that the names, the dedications on the stained glass windows were the same as a lot of the names of the streets in this town. And I asked someone, is there a relationship here? You know, like, were the founding members of your community also the founding members of this church? And the person didn't know the answer to that. In fact, no one in this congregation knew the answer to that until I found later that in fact they had been. So like this church had like some of the very same founders of this town be the first members of this church. And their names were all connected. The street names in the town and the names in the plaques in the church were the same. And I think if we learn those stories about our own church, we can tell something about how we got here. And so I love this topic, and thanks for your ideas on it, Deborah.
Thank you. So who are our neighbors? It's always important to remember that we are neighbors. We may not live in the same neighborhood where the church is, but we are neighbors. And so we have an integral part within the community. And so knowing our community is important. What kind of community was it? You know, every so many years, there's a demographic shift. And so every time there's that demographic shift, our neighborhoods change. So, you know, is this the next up and coming neighborhood? Are you seeing a lot of younger professionals moving in? What's happening there? What is it looking like, right? Was it an urban neighborhood that people have moved out of? And so the neighborhood is now changing, and it seems to be a little less active, less activity, a little quieter perhaps, or desolate. How is the neighborhood changing? And who are the people served by our outward ministries? Do we know the people who we are serving, right? Do they come on a Saturday and they are coming for tutorial? Do all of us know who's coming in, or is it just a handful of us who are there meeting with the young people who maybe are coming in? Do we have a relationship with our neighborhood schools? And that's how we have the tutorial program happening. Are they immigrants? So are we aware of who are we serving? Who are we connecting with? Who are we seeking and serving Christ with? Very important to our story and knowing who we are. The church where I am, we serve a lot of people. We serve some women who are trafficked. We are the church where if something happens in someone's life, they will call us and say, my sister died, my brother is in the hospital. And they are not the Sunday worshipers, but they are members of our community. And so they look at us when there are times of crises. So do we know who we are serving, who we are in relationship with, who we are ministering with and among? And what about the people we sit next to, right? Our seniors. We see them on Sundays, but do we connect with them during the week? Do we know what their life is like when we don't see them? Do we know what's happening with our young people who may be away at college or maybe going to college? Are they college students who are members of our families, or do they come on a Sunday? Are they couch surfing? Do we know their stories? And what about our 12-step groups? Do we have them, and do we interact with them? Or do they just use our buildings on a Saturday? So all of these, knowing who our neighbors are, is a part of our story, and it's a part of our stewardship. So how do our ministries meet the needs of our neighbors? How do we find that out? It's important for us to name how we interact with them and how we impact our neighborhood. So as Davy said just a little while ago, serving meals, maybe we have a food program. How many meals do we serve every week or once a month? Or how many bags of groceries do we give out? Are we aware of all of those things? Do we know what the needs are in our community? Sometimes there may be a need that we're not aware of. Maybe there's a large senior population in our communities who are just looking for a community. So being able to name the ways that we engage with our neighbors is important, and also knowing what their needs are important.
One of the things you keep inviting us to do, Deborah, that I think is so important is to really actively know our neighbors. They're not just people we see on the street or in the grocery store or that we drive by or wave to, but they're actually people we minister to. Every one of them is part of that. I go to a church that's in an urban setting, and so we can actually walk the boundaries of our parish, right? Not many people can do that anymore because in our larger suburban congregations, we drive to them and they're more scattered. But one of the things that we've done in my own congregation is to walk around our neighborhood, send groups out in 2s and 3s, and see who's there, like who's in the stores, who's in the playgrounds, what businesses are starting up, what have recently closed. What do we know about our neighborhood by walking around and observing who's there, who the people are? And then we can begin to say, well, what do they need? You know, is the grocery store closing? And so maybe we should think about that. Or are there too many adult, or I should say, what am I trying to say? Programs for kids? Are we having too many daycare centers? And so the market is drying up for that. Like, what should we do? Not start another daycare, for example. How do we take a look at what our neighborhoods are and what they need and what they don't need? And I think that your invitation to really know, not just casually be acquainted with, but really know our neighbors is a really beautiful one. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And our evidence of good stewardship, being transparent and accountable is really important, that everybody knows what's our ministry plan. That's another name for a budget. How is our leadership stewarding our ministry plan? Is all that information available? Is it posted somewhere? Is it on our website? Are people encouraged to ask questions about it if they have questions? You know, what are our goals and how we plan to raise funds if we're having fundraisers? Is that clear? What is the hope? What is the outcome we're seeking? Our vestry minutes, are they published? We put ours on a bulletin board. Does everybody know that vestry meetings are open? And, you know, I made that little face because I know sometimes that's an area that may be a little, it may be a little tense, but vestry, does everybody know that vestry meetings are open meetings and they can come? Do we have a plan, a what if plan? Do we have a recovery plan in case, like right now, we're in a very challenging economic moment? And are we having conversations around the what if, which is important? That's also a part of our being good stewards, being transparent, and remembering that there's an entire congregation that moves along with us. We're all in this together. There are leaders within our parishes, the finance committee and the vestry and that, but at the end of the day, we are all in this together. And so being upfront about where we are economically and not being afraid to have the what if conversation. Having that conversation takes the fear out of the what if, and it helps us to be good stewards, and especially having everyone on the same page. So all of these things, making sure that the budget is accessible, making sure that the vestry minutes are accessible, making sure that we have a clear understanding of our goals, our financial goals, who's involved in all of that, and that there is an open door for anyone who wants to participate, and not being afraid to have that what if conversation are all, that's good stewardship. So leadership is always forward thinking. We're always, you know, in the clerical world, we talk about the already not yet. So our leaders are always also in the already not yet. We're always thinking about, what are our goals? Where are we going? You know, what is that that's always in front of us as we're seeking to serve God in the world, and to be in service with our neighbors and with our community and with our congregation. What are the goals that we have? You know, what do we hope for our membership? Are we hoping to grow the membership by a particular percentage? And if that's the case, what does that look like and how are we going to do that? Maybe we are reassessing the ministry that we're involved in, and is that still relevant? And is God calling us into a new space, a new place? I don't mean brick and mortar, but a new space of ministry. You know, there's an influx of Afghan refugees in our community now. How do we serve them? Are we being called to serve them? Is that a ministry that we're now being called into? And not forgetting about what we already do, and honoring and celebrating what we already do. That's always important, to have moments of celebration and saying, look at the ministry that we do, not from a space of patting oneself on the back, but of honoring where God is calling us to exercise, living into the gospel in a particular way. Do we need to add to our staffing? Do we need to change our building in some way? Do we need to reduce our staffing? What does all that look like? So what are our goals around that? And what are we seeing happening, right? For instance, we have a friendly pantry. We give out groceries once a month. And there was another church that also gave out groceries, and that ministry ended. And so we began having conversations. How do we fill that gap now? Because we will be getting even more people. So what does that look like? And so what are the predictable future events? What are we seeing happening around us? We always, that forward thinking, it's also looking at the big picture. And always asking the question, what is God calling us to be and to do?
And I think that that's so important to put into some sort of a case for support, because we want people to know it's not just this year. This is an ongoing relationship, right? And your church and your voice are helping shape the future of where we're going with this. So I often think, every clergy person has an idea of how many new families they'd like to see join the church this year, either because of program needs or stewardship numbers, or just because they have a goal in mind. But if they don't share that goal, if we don't talk about what our goals are, how can our members help us get there? So this is true of how many new members do we want? What new ministries are we thinking of? Where do we need to go in the future? Are we going to finally need to tackle that leaking roof next year or in 2 years? So where do we go? And the more we inform people about what's coming up, the more we are leading that effort rather than reacting to that effort. And nothing sells more than leadership. When we have to react, when we have to go back and ask people for money to fix something, it's harder to do. It's easier when we say, look, we can be a part of this forward thinking thing. We can fix this before it breaks. We can invest now. It's so much better for our congregations when we do that. I'm not just talking about capital campaign, but I'm talking about the kinds of things that we put into our operating budgets as well. Staffing, programs, how we imagine ourselves to be. I want to go over a few more slides pretty quickly, and then I want to make sure that we come back in and have some time for questions. I want us to talk a little bit about making certain that every case for support tells people how they can make their gifts. And I say this because last year, a church sent me their great fundraising brochure, and it was beautiful. They put a lot of effort and a lot of work in it. And nowhere on this brochure did it say how people could make a gift. Didn't have a website, didn't have an address, it didn't say send your checks here. They just forgotten that part. And I don't blame them. You're so excited to tell the story and you're telling all the stuff. But if you miss the point on how people can make your gift, you've given them the hard sell without the follow-up. So please make sure that you give them a wide variety of ways. There are a couple of webinars on our site you can take a look at on virtual giving platforms, event-based fundraising platforms, ways that you can make sure. We have a couple of great articles in our resource library on what makes for a good online donation page or a pledge card. Make sure you have lots of ways for people to make their gifts, because the more ways you offer, the more the easier it is for people to be a part of your case. The days of the church saying we accept cash and checks and we like them in plates and envelopes, thank you, they are waning. We need to be more advanced in how we think about using the technologies available to us, online giving, bank transfers, and allowing people, especially those who are living on retirement assets, to make gifts from their IRAs and know how to do that, make planned gifts and how to do that, participate in all the ways so that we can make sure that every way that people want to give have that option for making a gift using securities. Talk to your diocesan office. If you don't know how to take somebody's stock and sell it and add it to your goal, your diocesan office has a way to do that, and someone will know how to do that. So make sure you give people all the ways that they can make their gifts to your church, because every single one of them is important and people will use them if you give them the opportunities to. So you've just been through this. We've been talking for 70 minutes almost now on all the things that you need to gather for your case for support. And boy, it's a long list. But you got to put it into a small amount of information, a small brochure, right? If you go on for pages and pages and pages, it starts to look a little crazy. It starts to look like, what are we doing here? We're publishing a book when we just need a brochure. How can we minimize our words and maximize our impact so that people can really get the message? So after you've done that hard work of gathering stories, of talking about your mission, of collecting metrics and getting your impact understood, and talking about the future and talking about the ways people can give, make sure you put it in as concise a way as possible, in a couple of pages, in front and back, or a trifold brochure, or something that makes sense to people. Don't forget to leave some white space so that people don't feel anxious about what they're reading. And don't forget to test it. I know we get pushed at the end of the summer to create our brochure and get it out and get it ready for our stewardship campaign. But take that extra week to convene that little focus group, or pass it past a few people in your congregation that you know will give you the honest feedback and say, what should we change? Before we send this to print, what should we change? You will get some great advice. Include pictures. Your own pictures are best. Pictures of your people and your programs. Get permissions, especially if you're involving kids. And if you're posting them on your website, make sure people are okay with that. But pictures say things that takes lots of words to do. It's true that a picture is worth 1,000 words or more. So do that. If you have anyone who works in an ad firm in your congregation or has worked in advertising or marketing, ask them to take a look at your sentences. Maybe you can take something that's long and put it into some action words. Tighten up your copy. Why am I saying this? Because when we get right to the point, we're not wasting people's time. We're still communicating the good stuff that we need to, but we're using the tools that advertising, that marketing, that people with all those communications degrees that we know, they help us. How do we craft this into something that people can easily digest, react to, feel impacted, and then feel like they want to make a gift? Always use numbers when possible to talk about our metrics and goals. As I said, it's great to say you feed people. It's better to say how many people you feed. Storytelling, Deborah's points about making those story elements. We want to hear from each other. Always include a testimonial. And if you do a stewardship season and you're doing 4 or 5 or 6 Sundays, have a different story. Have somebody tell their story to communicate, why does this case matter to me? Why am I a donor here? Why am I a member here? Why does my family support the work here? Why do we volunteer here? Those stories are beautiful, and they are what motivate others to begin their own relationships or to deepen their relationships. Finally, please make sure that you have, you don't just have a paper brochure, that you also have a PDF that you can email people, that if you have a website, that you have a way to put your materials on your website, include links to your Facebook page, your Instagram, whatever social media your church uses. Your case, your stewardship materials, your whole campaign should also be online, not just paper. This is really important, and we certainly saw it in 2020 and 2021 when our church doors were closed for a while. We saw the power of making certain that we could virtualize things. I want to us back into our conversation group so we can ask and answer questions. I also see that you've typed some in while I've been talking, which is great. So I'm going to take a look at what you have written while someone might raise their hand and ask a question and or give an example of something that's worked well in your congregation. We had one question that came in. Should the statement be sent out with pledge cards or earlier? Absolutely. Once you've invested in creating this material, send it out. If you do a mailing, or if you pick up your envelopes at the back of the church, or if you email it out to everyone, distribute this case far and wide. You've spent time and energy and perhaps even money creating it. So make sure it gets out there and in all the ways. Post it on your website, email it to everyone, put it on your Facebook. Janet asks if we should include giving data for last year. And I think that that's always helpful. I think it's a good way for people to see, here's what we do, here's what's been done. If our board member, Timothy Dombeck, were here, he would say, include some data like what's the median gift. And he would say, not the average. So don't take everything and average it out. Look at the median gift. What's that middle point of giving? It helps people understand what the common gift is in your congregation. So if most people give like around $3,000 or $2,500 or $1,400, that is your median gift perhaps. It shows up most in your spread. And so let people know what the starting point is. Often people who don't know where to start will aim too low. So make sure you, when you're including giving data, do it in a way that helps people see where they go on it. You can look on our website in our resource library for some great documents on how to do that steps thing that you've seen where it says number of households and amount given, and you can see your impact as it moves up, or a giving pyramid. We give you a template on how to create a giving pyramid. Those pictures and ways to talk about giving data are also as important as sharing the data itself. Great question, Janet. What are other questions or ideas that you might have? You've just been dazzled by 90 minutes of talking.
I would just say that a lot of churches have done really good core value work. And if you can integrate that in your case statement and saying, this is what we've always known to be one of our highest values, and this is how we lived it out or are living it out this year, just to affirm that's part of our story, because so much of our core values are established through years and years of behaviors that we have done. And so that's just reaffirming who we are and how we're living into it. So I think integrating, if you have core values, don't let it sit on the shelf. Integrate them in a creative way in your case statement.
Good point. Any other last questions or examples you'd like to teach us about before we close? Nancy types that we tend to always end up with the same total figure no matter what we do for a campaign. This is true for most. So, I think a lot of times when the church membership is the same this year as it was last year, people are often giving the same gift that they gave last year. And so no matter what you say, it might be, your stewardship might look a little stagnant. We have a great webinar in our webinar library on breaking through the pledge plateau. So it is full of great points on how to, it takes some of this stuff that we've talked about today, making the case, talking about how to be compelling, and it also helps us share and motivate our donors. So take a look at that webinar and the slide deck that goes with it, and also our resource library for some tools on how to tell your story more effectively and inspire your donors to make their best gifts. The thing about a static campaign is that nobody's household finances are exactly the same this year as they were last year. They've changed in some way. Perhaps they've gone up, perhaps they've gone down. We definitely don't want to see our giving go down, but we understand that it moves with trends. But as people's careers change and as people move through the cycle of raising families and then sending them off and then finally being done paying for college, household income changes and a household giving should change as well. So we need to give people a reason to change their pledge and tell them why they can make their best gift. That was a good question. Well, I really appreciate everything that you've brought to this. Your questions help us. We learn from them as well. I want to point out that we have more webinars this year. We're taking a break in the summer. We've learned that in June and July, people just don't want to sign up for Saturday webinars, but we'll be back in August, September, and October to do webinars on some great stuff. What are we moving into? What is the church like as we move into the endemic? That's one of our trainings for later this year. We're going to give a pep talk on how to use this year's resources more than enough, which is our annual pledge campaign theme for this year. We're going to talk about how to use that in your congregation. And then in October, we're going to talk about how to grow and build and reaffirm your legacy society and your planned giving in your congregation. So some good trainings coming up. You can always access previous trainings on our website. We're going to post this on YouTube and on our website, the recording from today, also the slide deck, and I will email you all out and let you know when it's available and how you can link to it, and also provide some resources that we've talked about today and make sure that you can deepen this conversation. I really appreciate your time. Deborah, thank you for joining me from your kitchen. And thank you for everything that you brought to this. You know so much about stewardship. You had some brochures to show us, didn't you?
Oh, I did. So I brought a couple. This one, Journey into Faith, is the first one that we did once when I became the rector. And it has scripture and pictures of members of the congregation on the back. And then we can actually, I'll take some pictures and send them off to Davey, and then he can include them. This is one of our stewardship brochures as well, with I am the light of the world. So all of them that we've done has, and their pictures of members of the congregation and involved in some of our ministries and that. There's a picture of the church. There's another text, and then some icons with some scripture. So each year it's a little bit different, but we Christ is always in the center. At the beginning, this is another one. So I will take pictures of all of these and send them to Davey, and then he can include them because it's a threefold
Great.
mailer.
And if you have PDFs of them from the design process, that would be great too.
It would be great. I don't know if I have those.
So Deborah, next time you and your congregation decides a brochure, make sure you have the PDF as well, so you can email it out for free. And
I will
do better.
I will do that, but I also will check with our parish administrator and see if we have copies of these.
I bet your parish administrator is sitting on a copy somewhere.
Somewhere, yes.
This is really beautiful, and thank you all of you for your time today. We're with you. We walk with you in stewardship. So please feel free to reach out to me with questions that might come up. I love to talk about stewardship. I love to come and talk with your congregations virtually. I can beam all over the country and do that. And so please invite me. Chris from Palm Desert invited me last year to hang out with the folks at St. Margaret's, and it was great. Tomorrow I'm preaching in Shelburne, Vermont. Who knew I could be in everywhere, and it's so easy. So I love this work, and I love what you're doing with this work. So please keep TENS informed, help us help you, and check back with our trainings later this summer and fall. We're here to walk with you. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.